Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Off the Top. Today we are going to be talking about the strategy and tactics to become highly skilled at something and maybe in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, I think that's something important because the quicker you can learn a skill and prove it to someone, the quicker you are to stand out from your competition and build on that. As noticing going into the job field that more people are looking at my skill set than my actual degree, and it's very important to be able to know how to verify or diversify that skill set in a fast manner.
Yeah, totally. I mean, what you really have, your skills are basically your tools that you use to get jobs done. And the finer tune you have on your skills, or the more skills that you can pull out from your tool belt, so to speak, the better suited you will be for certain things and a larger amount of things than if you didn't have those tools.
Do you think that kind of our age group or this time period, that having a diverse skill set or being able to build on that is more important than in the past?
So that's a really good question. And I think that the area and realm and sexiness of being like a specialist in a certain like area or field is still something that's highly sought after and is compensated highly, just looking at the job market. But at the same time, I think that there are more opportunities and desire, especially for the culture that we're in, like you were saying, to kind of be generalists in the fact that you see people becoming entrepreneurs and having their hands in a lot of different things and not specifically specializing on one very like peculiar or like specific niche. It's kind of a general amalgam of things that they kind of use as one.
Yeah. And I think along with that, you're seeing a trend of even if you're specialized in a skill, you still wear like different hats, as they call it, where you may be specialized in accounting, but you might have some other hat of where you're doing, organization for something along that lines, where you're highly specialized in something, but you still have the sub skill set that helps you out in your job field in some way. And I feel like that's something we'll touch on as we talk, is that even if you're highly specialized in one skill, it still is very important to be skilled in other areas.
Yeah. I think it just comes down to the point of having things that make you marketable, and having more skills makes you more marketable. And it's kind of simple as that.
Yeah. And I think you'll really notice that there are people that are really behind that aren't taking the action to build on these skills or use the free knowledge that's out there to build those skills. And the ones that are taking advantage of it and being these entrepreneurs or leading their industry have really taken a grasp of that learning and moved really quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe in some cases they've done certain things that maybe aren't as traditional as like your normal way of learning a skill. But without further ado, I want to hop into one of my, like the main things that I do to gain a skill and to gain it specifically maybe an accelerated rate than normal is, and I'm going to sound like a broken record because I've said it before, but all right, I'm jumping out there. You got to have your why. You got to have your goal. And I've said it a lot of times, but that should show you the emphasis of this thing to me is you got to have something that you're going for, a reason that you're doing this thing.
Yeah. And I think that kind of surprised me because what I would say my first step is the understanding. Like, why do I need this? What will I do with this? How can it benefit me or how can it benefit others? And where am I trying to get with it? And once I have those laid out, I realize that's something I want to work on.
Yeah, totally. And with that, I mean, with that very clear mindset of why you want to do this thing and like what for, I think that gives you that greater sense of reason than just because you found it cool at one period in time or it's kind of in. And to go further on that note, I was listening to a podcast of the MF CEO, and and that's literally what his podcast is called. This guy, he's slipping my his name's slipping my memory right now, but I think he founded GNC, And what he said, and it resonates to me and with me, and like I still think about it to this day, is that he uses a very specific type of visualization before he goes to bed on his goals, and it like propels him in the future. So he says that before he goes to bed, so for instance, I'll put it in my perspective. So when I was studying for the CFA, every night before I would go to bed, I would think and close my eyes and visualize what it would be like to be a CFA. Like, see what I'm seeing as a CFA. Like, I have my own vision, and so I'm watching what I'm doing and knowing what it feels like. So is it like, even to the point of like, is it warm or cold in this room, or if I'm in a room or not, what it sounds like, and how like emotionally what it feels like as well. And the clearer you have of this image, the more reason, and I feel like the more weight it carries when you're doing like the actions to get to the goal.
So it's like a vivid like affirmation, like saying, I will be here. This is what I imagine it to feel like, kind of getting situated to that area. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, totally. And like other people have done it too. So one of my favorites is being a basketball guy, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I was listening to a podcast. I'm a podcast guy, so you could tell, of Michael Cooper. And Michael Cooper, he was a Laker back in the day when it was Showtime era, and he was a hell of a defender, is what he was known for. And before games, he was talking about how Kareem would sit there in silence and not say anything and be almost dormant. And one day Michael Cooper came up to him. He's like, "Hey, Kareem, what are you doing?" And Kareem told him he was visualizing the game and taking it step by step. And even before the game happens in the game of basketball, it's not like you can really predict more than max a couple steps ahead. And to not even touch the floor yet, one of basketball's all-time greats is visualizing how the game is going. It just shows you how the power of the, like, you know, mentally stepping through and experiencing something before it really happens is.
Yeah. And I think that wraps into when you're trying to build a skill quicker, like what Kareem is doing in the other podcasts you listen to, is you're seeing all the steps or feeling what's going to happen. And you're kind of visualizing, okay, this is some things I might encounter. This might be how I work around it. This is how I'll surpass it. And these are the things that I might need to work on to surpass that certain obstacle. And when it comes to learning a skill super fast, you want to make sure you're on track and understanding all the variables that go into it when you say your skill you want to learn is playing the guitar.
Yeah, totally. And I think you touched on the very, very big point of they're doing this, I think, because it gives them an opportunity for problem solving. Any road or journey you travel, it'll never be one without speed bumps if it's one worth doing. So with that, anticipating those, and before you even happen to come across them, formulating some sort of solution to them is one of the biggest steps to, you know, getting over those speed bumps as fast as possible, because you already have some sort of contingency plan when they come along.
Yeah. And it further goes into, even when you're learning a skill, you're going to fail. And I may have mentioned this in previous podcasts, but once you fail, you've learned why you failed, and you can step over that and say, you know, this, while I was playing the guitar, I wasn't, you know, focusing on the notes and I couldn't play the song. And you go back and you're like, okay, I need to really settle in and learn how to read notes. And once you do that, you can play the complete song.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and I'm one of those, and I feel like I lean more of a cynical sense when it comes to this. I think that at some points, like, failure is almost over romanticized, but at the same time, it's the only thing that separates the neophytes or the fledglings, people that are very newbie, to the people that are absolutely experts, is the amount of times one has failed compared to the other.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't heard the term newbie in a while, so that kind of caught me off
Yeah,
guard.
noobs.
Yeah, but I think too, one of the things to touch on, kind of similar to failure, is kind of realizing the difference between progressing towards something and stagnating. So to me, like, you can be learning a skill. Say you want to learn how to make a layup, and you can make a right-handed layup 10 out of 10 times. And you're like, okay, I'm skilled at right-handed layups. And you think you've mastered it. But when you get into a game situation, you aren't always going to have that same setup coming from the right side, 1, 2, no one's touching you. Like, you're going to have to learn all the little nuances of what, goes in that layup. Like, for example, Kyrie Irving, Stephen Curry, like, we see them make crazy shots all the time. And it's like, oh, those are so lucky. But I guarantee you they thought about this circumstance and have practiced it for hours and hours and hours to understand every variable, like we touched on, that goes into it. So you need to be able to understand, like, oh yeah, I've mastered this, or I have the real base fundamental down, and there's a lot of variables that I've still got to work out or branch my skill tree into.
No, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's one of those things where I feel like the people that are almost perfectionists and have this obsessive personality when it comes to this thing, like, I'm going to reference somebody else in the sport of basketball. When the Miami Heat won that championship with LeBron James, Ray Allen, and Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade against the Spurs, Ray Allen was getting interviewed, and he said that he got asked and a lot of people talked about how amazing his shot was, but nobody, and it stuck out to him. Nobody asked him, how did you know that you were going to take a fading shot from the very corner of the court from the 3-point line? And it's those things that the greats are prepared for, and I feel like it's not a coincidence. It's really, I mean, the future is for those who prepare, is a thing that I like to say a lot.
Yeah, and I know you and I talked on when Ray Allen retired, he released a document or a letter to the fans through the Players Tribune, and it touched on his lifehood. And one of the points it talked on very similar was he would always encounter people and they'd be like, you have a God-given jump shot. It's perfect. And his response to having a God-given talent was God doesn't give a damn if I make a jump shot. And I think that speaks volumes, saying that he worked really hard to get that. And it's almost insulting to him that people think it's just a natural talent. Yeah, it's there, but there's hours put into that to get where he was.
Yeah, totally. And even to touch on that more and maybe switch gears, one important thing that I think people listening should know is that, and it's going to sound shitty to hear and listen to, but I feel like it's important to sink in that, and maybe going counter to what you've heard before, but if you just work hard, that is no guarantee of you being successful. Just working hard isn't enough. There's so many other factors and things that you need to do that just working hard isn't going to be adequate enough for if you truly want to be and granted, success is a very relative term. So compared to somebody else, that could get them to where they want to be. But to get them to where we're kind of talking about the upper echelon or maybe even world class at something, hard work is not going to get you there on its own.
Yeah. And I think something to take out of that is you may be working as hard as you physically can or what you think hard is. But if you want to say you're going in a competitive industry and you want to be the CEO of Nike and you're like, oh, I'm working really hard right now, I'm doing this and that. But working hard is subjective. And I think that kind of comes back to the skill set thing. You can work as hard as you think you're working until someone checks you. And I think that's one of the steps for me that's really important when building a skill. It's either finding a mentor or getting checked. Because you're not going to know how hard you're working or if you're slacking off until someone lets you know.
Yeah. And I feel like those two things are even somewhat complements to each other, just because when you're building this skill, some of the times when you're building a skill, it's maybe a majority of the time you're doing it alone, either if it's, working on basketball stuff or working on photography or working on like whatever specific skill you want to talk about, guitar, you're going to be working on your own. And it's important to have some sort of idea of what you want to end up as. I mean, a goal, but at the same time, there's things in people that you would probably do better off of emulating in small senses to kind of keep on elevating your game. And maybe that's a mentor who breaks it down and how they do it, or maybe it's like a YouTube video, or even if it's some dude that you hate and he just shreds on the guitar and you're like, man, I can't despise him, but let me pick apart some of these things that he's doing that I like, and I'll take him for my own.
Yeah. And I think with that, like going further than that personal story for me, like I'm previously said a marketing major, and most people come to me like, oh, why are you so familiar with this marketing? Why do you seem so advanced, or where are you getting these techniques from? And to me, it's kind of a question that's like, okay, am I working hard, or are you not working? Because like in my free time, I'm reading these articles and learning about new technology or what's big or trending in the marketing world, and watching these YouTube videos, like you said, or even cold emailing, just some, never set your goals. Like goals can never be too big. So I can email, if I can find their email and I like what they do, I'm going to email them. Because the worst thing you're going to get is a no. And if you get information from that, that's going to make your journey to that skill more and more valuable. And I just think it's important to understand that, like, if you really want to be skilled, this is a great era where you can almost reach anyone. You just have to put in the work to find them, or, find their gatekeeper and get there, and you'll get some valuable information. And if not, you'll learn some things on the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something I was going to touch on too. I mean, and as cliche as it sounds, never has it been as easy to get a hold of somebody ever in the history of time for human beings. And so use that to your advantage. And yeah, cold emailing is honestly encouraged and strategic too, to save some of your time. Like what I would suggest, and what I've read and what I've participated in is, let's say you want to get good at surfing, and you first, like, all right, so I know the world's best surfer is blank. I'm not really well versed on surfing, which is probably not a good idea of making an example. Yeah. But once again, I know that he's the world's best, so I'm not going to, like, it would be tougher for me to pursue the world's best at something compared to maybe the second world's, like the person who's right below him, who isn't as like sought after or as active, or even the third. And so as you want to like create this like vast supply of skills and opportunities to learn things from different people, really think about those people that you can emulate or even get a chance to converse with on the internet.
Yeah, and I think what you touched on is very important. Like, maybe you're not able to reach the first, or you're going for the second or seventh or 15th on that list. A lot of the times, if you think about it, like being that second or 7th or 15th person is a lot hungrier than that first person. So if you're able to get in contact with that person and see what they're doing to try to catch up to number one or be number one, it's going to be a lot more valuable than, say, the guy who's number one is like, oh yeah, I've been doing, this for 6 years, while number two is like, yeah, I was doing that for a couple of years, but I'm working on this new strategy that hopefully blows up. And you learn something from that, or you learn a new technique surfing, or whatever that may be. Each circumstance or each person you contact is going to have a different circumstance or some knowledge to give you in that chain.
Yeah. And even to kind of like twist that and put a different angle on it, a lot of the times, like the people who are the best or are naturally gifted at something, they succeed in spite of what they do. So for instance, like let's say somebody who's naturally just built and big, they're strong in spite of the exercises they do. And not saying that they're doing wrong exercises, but usually it's that person who isn't as naturally gifted, just like sports and coaching. Usually the best coaches aren't always the players or the people that participate in the sports most naturally gifted people, because they're like naturally and innately predisposed to do these things that some people really have to break down and work on very, very particular skills to become like good at. So for instance, like Coach K, he basketball coach for Duke University. He wasn't like an extraordinary basketball player, but he's extraordinary at teaching people how to play basketball. And people like that who kind of seem like a peculiar people who are just like swimmers. There's a world-class swimmer who swims for a country, and he picked it up when around 30, and he has a very interesting swimming technique. I'm going to have to find this guy and somehow notate it for you guys down in the description. But he picked it up so late, and he's not naturally gifted at it. So what that would indicate, him being world class, is that his skill level, and if you could see my hands, my right hand is way above my left hand, and his skill level, my right hand, must be much higher than the skill level of people that are naturally gifted at it for him to compete against them and hang around the same area if he wasn't as physically and naturally gifted, you'd think.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those times in whatever industry you're in, you can kind of see those people who are extremely, naturally gifted or talented. And then you can also see the ones who work really hard. And if you can find, I guess you consider it a unicorn or a gem, but if you find that person that is extremely gifted at what they do and work really hard, an example, Kobe Bryant, really gifted, worked really hard and achieved a lot of success. And like anyone could agree, like that stands out. And if you can find someone like that or find a route to get there, those are great people to be in touch with, or to model, your skill set after, find out their work ethic to get their skill set. And I think that rolls into my next topic or my third point of building a skill for me would be watching. You always have to be watching and understanding your environment, what's going on and what's changing. And that factors in a lot into where your skill is going and what you can do to jump the competition.
Yeah, that's I feel like that's a very obvious one, is to be a student of whatever you're doing and not always to go out and do it immediately, but watch how it's done first. And I feel like there's a very, very great opportunity for somebody to basically get introduced to something that naturally they wouldn't come up with unless they watch somebody do it who maybe is naturally, like for instance, I naturally move this way, but watching somebody move a different way, that's like, oh my gosh, that's really interesting. I haven't thought about doing that. But if you think about it, what they're doing helps them better do X, Y, or Z, which once again, I'm learning.
Yeah. And I think kind of being able to watch and seeing how other people are failing or how other people are succeeding gives you keynotes to yourself and where you're progressing, like you said. And I think that kind of comes around too to one of the other things that you should be aware of is when, say, you're building a skill, is thinking about the other skills that come in down the line that help that skill. So I guess an example would be like, if you're a news anchor, like you should be a pretty good journalist in how to find out, all the information you need to present on live TV. But at the same time, you want to learn how to present or be social. And so sometimes you think you're going to learn one skill, but for that one skill, it takes multiple or a branch of skills to complete that skill.
Yeah, I think that's basically the point of cross-training, is that to fully have this skill that is absolutely refined, you need other skills that support it. Just for instance, like you said, if you're a news anchor, a skill that would probably help you is having very, very strong writing and very, very strong ability to convey an idea to somebody in the way that you intentionally imagine them to receive it.
Yeah, I think that's very important, because at the end of the time, once you get to the skill or whatever your end goal with this skill is, if you've gone the right path, you'll have picked up other skills that you thought about in the, before starting this skill set. Like, maybe after this, I'll do this. But you found out during that time, you learned how to, convey that information. Or another example, like if you are trying to learn Photoshop, you're also learning, photography. You're creating content. You're learning what's good and what's not. And then that content, you give content to Photoshop to build that main skill that you want.
Yeah. I mean, that's as good as it gets, just because there's things, if you specifically trained on one certain technique, that you'd be very deficient in other things that this art form or skill requires, just because you aren't opening and expanding your minds in different avenues that overlap that specific skill set, and even in ways that you probably didn't imagine or intention would.
So give me a skill that you learned recently and the process you went through to learn it at a quicker pace than average.
Okay. So the one that I've really been kind of fostering right now is photography. And so I got in photography because I was inspired just by, first off, like one of my, I'm a creator, so I love creating things and putting things out there for people to digest and experience themselves. So naturally got into photography, and I'm a researcher, so one of the first things I did was watch. And so I watched YouTube videos, I read articles, and I consumed as much as I could in like a short amount of time.
What were some of the YouTube videos that you watched, or the people that you watched?
Mainly, pardon me?
That stick out to you?
I mean, I really don't specifically, like, it's not like I will hammer people that, like certain people, but it'll be certain things. So for instance, it'll be, I've watched probably like 10 different videos on shot composure and f-stops and like technical things, and then also like how to work lighting. Like there's been countless videos that I've watched, and I think it's more important that you don't just watch specifically one person, because you have that one person's ideas all the time. But you also watch different people, because different people think differently and have like explained things differently. And also like, I feel like you're getting a way more well-rounded experience and knowledge if you're having it come from different angles. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But other than that, and then once that happened, I also reached out to somebody who I know is fairly successful at photography, and like have met with them a couple times to talk about it and talk about the process they went through. So even like a small mentorship on top of me learning through the internet, and then obviously going out and shooting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And where do you feel that you're at in this process of developing that skill?
Oh, I'm extraordinarily nascent still in the fact that like it's, I don't have any refined skill yet, and I wouldn't expect myself to, and the degree that I hold myself as far as like, all right, so this is when I know I'm very skilled, is very far away. And not saying that's my goal to be very, very skilled, but if I keep on chasing it, I know it'll just be a matter of time. But just like with anything, it does take time. I mean, you can accelerate it with certain things. And one thing that I want to mention too is being very particular with how you practice as well, and effect of the 80-20 rule. Some of you guys have probably heard it, and maybe we've even mentioned it on here before, but it basically is this rule that 80% of your results come from 20% of something, or 80% of anything comes from 20% of something. So for instance, 80% of the great shots that you have in photography, just because I want to stay on subject, is because of 20% of the actions that you do or I do. So being very intentional about how you practice, and I don't think that practice makes perfect. I would say perfect practice makes perfect. But if you work very, very like specifically on certain skills, and you can kind of do it, and I know it's mundane and a little tedious, but if you can apply yourself to very focused efforts and concentrated efforts, I think you can see leaps and bounds of your skill level in a very short amount of time, just off of very, very specific actions that you can like take again and again.
Yeah. And I think that touches on my 4 steps. The last step is practice. And to me, practice, like you said, is more than just doing it, but having a pattern or a rhythm or a way of doing it. That way, each time you're evolving. And the other thing with me in the practice segment is being confident and not being afraid of what others people think. And I think that stems from like, if you want to, be a photographer or a musician, and your friend group is trying to roast you for that, like, cut them out. Like, no one needs that. Like, coming from people who know me, like, if I don't care, I don't care. Like, you can get gone. And I think that's something that's big, is understanding during your practice, if people are supporting you and you're able to talk to people and get their real insight, is, like you said, leaps and bounds to help. Like, if you take a photo and someone's like, oh yeah, that's cool, but they aren't really telling you anything about it, like, they aren't giving you anything. But if you have a real friend who's like, you show them a photo like, oh yeah, I really like this, but maybe you should try this, or you should do this, is a lot more helpful to you, even if it's on a small scale, in the long run, than someone who's just kind of like boosting you just to do it.
So how would you say, or what do you think when you do run into the negative reactions to things that you're learning or things that you're doing? So like, for instance, let's say that you had a YouTube series and you had a video that people said that your quality is bad and that you are like boring or dull, or like, giving you negative feedback on that. And how do you react to that? Like you said, you don't pay much stock into the negative parts, but how would you react to something like that?
I mean, like, I've done a few different YouTube things and a few different things here and there, but like, I think everything comes with a grain of salt or a grain of truth, where say someone brings it to your attention, like, hey, your quality is a little off, it's a little fuzzy, or like your transitions are a little abrupt, or it doesn't seem smooth. I think there's a grain of salt you take with that. Like, okay, you watch it yourself and like, okay, I see what they're saying. What can I do to change that? And that kind of goes down into getting those skills. But it also is like, you have to realize sometimes if you're hearing the same thing from the same person over and over again, it might not be what they're looking at. That might just be them out of spite. Or like, I think an example is, I don't look at negative, but if you are friends with someone who's always saying the same thing, or like, sweet dude, do it, cool, like, and they never like, dude, this is sweet because like, I like the way you frame this photo, or I like the colors in this photo, and they aren't giving you any feedback, I think that's worse than getting negative feedback. I think getting false positive feedback is worse, because you're more likely to believe positive feedback. You're about to take that to heart. You aren't going to like, oh, no, they're going to be playing, but like, you take it to heart. And over time you realize, like, if they would have given you negative feedback and you would have took that to heart and like, you know what, they're right, let me impress them, or let me do this. You've advanced to work on it. As taking positive feedback that's fake, you become very complacent.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think what it comes down to, like what you were talking about, comes down to understanding it's a growing process, and that understanding that as sexy and as great as it sounds, like people aren't just going to 99% of everybody isn't going to naturally be extraordinarily gifted at something just off like first blush. And being okay with making mistakes, and being okay with not always having like either being the best at something, and being all right with working towards being the best with something too, are very, very important skills, and very, very important mindsets even to have when you're tackling something that you're starting out with.
Yeah. And I think it's important to realize too, like you're saying, is time frame. Like we're talking about some tips that can help you speed up the process of learning a skill. Where speeding up is vague, general, could be any time frame to you. But most of the time these skill sets are going in the long run. So even if you are just starting videography and creating video, like people, you might not get a whole lot of hype or people or fans, or you might not really enjoy the process for the first year. And that first year clicks and you finally kind of figure out your workflow, and you're shooting different video and B-roll. And you're like, I'm really starting to like this, and you're really diving deep into it. Then before you know, the end of the second year is done, and it just exponentially grows like that. Then it just becomes second nature. And by that time you may have put in your 10,000 hours.
Yeah. And I think that's also a really good point too, what you just mentioned there. The way that you will be great at something is, it's going to be a long road, however, which way you take it. And the fact that, to be world class at something, you will need to put, a lot of time in, and, be very, very consistent with it too. So for instance, let me paint a picture for you. Let's say that, there is this world-class golfer, and he's having a really bad day, and you can see noticeably he's having a bad day, and the fans do too. And he hears some fan in the stands say, "I wish I could be you on your bad days." But in the real sense, what that golfer should say is, "You wouldn't want me on my bad days," just because his bad days are him practicing from, let's say that he practiced for 4 hours one day at a very, very specific thing. Or there's times when you practice and you literally have to, like, things aren't going well and you have to punch in and punch out almost like a job. You have to get your commitment done for the day and be committed. And it's one of those things where you're not going to make that granite sculpture just overnight. It's going to be one of those things where you wear the marble away into creating something that's magnificent.
Yeah. And I think what I'll add to that is that in building a skill set, instant gratification isn't a thing. That only exists on the internet and buying things in real life. If you think you're going to just, I watched this YouTube video by Casey Neistat and his filming's awesome, and you're going to just pick up a camera and do that the next morning, more likely than not, it's not going to happen. And if it does happen, you should really be doing something with it, but it's most likely not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't be afraid of the long journey at all. Don't, because regardless if you take it or not, I mean, in life, there's no certainty. So you could either do something that you want, or like have a zeal for and love to do and fail at it, or you can do something that's mediocre and you think is safe and fail at that too. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be shooting for the stars on this thing, and taking your licks as they come and just kind of being consistent with it.
Yeah. And I think, like you touched on, is great. When you're doing this skill, building this skill, whatever it may be, it's your passion. So even if it doesn't work out and you don't become as good as you did, you just played with your passion for a year, 3 years, whatever that is, and you loved every moment of it. And I think that's something that's really important to think of in, the short term or when it ends or whatever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if I could kind of rephrase and like package everything up, I mean, we first talked about like finding your why, like observing and possibly finding a mentor, being very specific with your practice. And lastly, we mentioned about being consistent. I mean, if you could kind of give our viewers one last or listeners one last like little tidbit, what would it be before we head off?
I think after those 4 steps, the one that starts it all is doing it. You can't do anything or go down this process without starting. It's not going to, if you're going to say it happens tomorrow, it doesn't happen tomorrow, it's not going to happen. As longer you put it off, the longer you have for someone to jump ahead of you and you never to catch up.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly well said, and great foot to leave this podcast on. So once again, thank you very much for listening. And if you want to leave your criticism down below in any of the forums and places that we're at, that's highly thanked, and we love seeing that stuff. And thanks for listening.
Thanks.